Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Manifest. We're talking about the second new episode. I am doing these individually. The first episode, episode 5, season 3, episode 5, my review should already be out. It came out like 30 minutes ago. Obviously, it's long since been out if you're watching this much later after the fact. Regardless, this was a great episode, a lot of interesting things. A dark episode. We'll get to it eventually. Well, it's not just a dark episode because of the ending, just because in general, this was a dark episode. But first and foremost, we're picking up with, like, Michaela confronting Jace. And for him, it's like his main ultimate goal. Yeah, taking care of Michaela is one thing, but his main ultimate goal is going after Cal because he blames Cal for everything. Once again, it's still unclear like why he holds the resentment he does, but maybe it's because he was already a dark individual, so maybe this is supposed to represent like the dark side of like the callings and all of this, that because it wasn't God that brought them back, or at least it was, but it's like this was supposed to be your chance to make up for the past. But in his mind, Cal is his last chance, but like Michaela was trying to tell him like these are your choices, and he lets like Michaela fall off the cliff. So he ends up ultimately finding out where Cal is because they end up reporting. The fact is that like there's spray paint on their garage saying like "ET go home" or whatever because of that journalist like blasting their location and everything last episode. So things didn't play out exactly the way I thought they would, but it kind of did to a certain extent because, you know, the domino effects. Because of what that journalist did, random people blew up Tariq's spot, sprayed it, and obviously the cops got involved because it's like, hey, could you do a little bit more? But then, like, the cop is like, well, there's not much I can do. I'm not unless your son's actually... AT was like, why are you even saying that? Don't. That's douchey thing to do. But the reason why this all happened is like, right, maybe you shouldn't be promoting your restaurant. And then like Grace is like, what? Tariq's like, I'm sorry. Like, because he was running his mouth to like the lady who at the restaurant, but obviously he was talking loud enough for nearby people to hear. Hence why the reporter dude or whoever he is, because we still don't know who he is, could have just been a random blogger for all we know. I was saying all this reporter, journalist and stuff like that. He could have just been a random blogger, which makes it worse. I don't know. I think it's worse him just being a random blogger. It's just as bad if he worked for a publication, but either way, regardless. So now Grace is kind of pissed at Tariq because he's the reason why everything's the way it is. But it's like, hey, don't worry, we got our little hiding spot. The fact of the matter is, like, it's their headquarters. It'd be a place that like Grace and Tariq would go when they were younger. So they're kind of hiding out. Obviously, Cal is a little nervous about everything, but it's like, don't worry, your Aunt Mick and your mom, your dad are gonna like have everything is gonna be okay. And so Tariq apologizes because he blames himself for like the circumstances, but Grace is like, I thought you'd be safe, I thought we'd be safe, but you know, you not knowing the truth. But it's like, hey, time to tell you the truth about what. Breaks it down, and it's like, oh, and you know, now Tariq is in the know, and it's like, oh, so can you just do the callings, whatever? He's like, yeah, so far that's typically not how it works, but you know, at least from his experience. And he's like, oh, we all kind of sound crazy, but Tariq's like, nah, my nephew's like a superhero. He's like, that's freaking awesome, you know. But then, you know, also like Tariq like keeping Enid like quiet, you know, doing the whole thing with the globe and everything, especially because that place has sentimental value, because it's like, right, anytime they had their own little operations, this is where Tariq and Grace would go, and you know, they, you know, try to get whatever they want to, like, oh, Operation Trip to Hawaii or something like that, or Operation Get a Dog or something. You know, it's this really nice moment between them, which makes later on even harder. But running through everything, obviously, Olive goes to the college to get more information about everything that's going down. They're going initially to the lake to follow Michaela because Ben ends up calling Jarrett and letting him know, like, okay, like, we need to be on the lookout for, like, Michaela and Jace, and kind of finding out about their location. Pete is being escorted by the federal agent. Obviously, Angelina doesn't want to go anywhere without Pete, so it's like, Ben's like, all right, fine, come along. So like everything's kind of moving along. Zeke ends up finding Michaela. Her shoulder's dislocated. It's a complicated thing. And luckily, you know, Zeke, I think, was able to kind of fight through the pain. I wonder, is it just because of like the circumstances, or what it was, maybe just his natural strength of will, but it's like he could feel Michaela's dislocated shoulder literally by his empath abilities. So she's like, no, you go ahead. He's like, no, I'm not leaving you behind. Just 1, 2, 3, and kind of pulls her up. But in that moment, it's like maybe he kind of acts as an amplifier to her raw emotion of like, we got to warn Cal and warn everybody else about what's going on. So in that moment, it's like her raw feelings, her strong emotions reverberated off of him. I guess like her being in pain and everything, like it just all like he acted as a satellite and amplified it out their will. Like Michaela is like wanting to protect Cal, and it triggers like a sign to Ben and Angelina where they see the bouncing ball. The good dude that was with them, the federal agent, he didn't see it because it wasn't real. So it's like, oh wait, that was Cal's ball. Like, and Michaela and Zeke kind of sent that sign. So it's like, once again, it's like this new level up stuff is crazy as what it's capable of. It's like, once again, calling like calling 2.0 or something like that. So I guess we still haven't even seen what it fully can do when the time comes, because it's not just about like you feeling what other people feel. You can ripple it out to, I guess, because I guess everyone within a certain radius acted as an antenna, being Ben and Angelina, but maybe because Angelina saw it as well. So it's like, everyone that's connected to this, like maybe it's just because Michaela, whether it's just because of Zeke, who knows? Like whether we'll get a clear answer for that, I don't know. But it's showcasing more and more what he's becoming. And I think whatever his circumstances are going to be like a huge key factor in everything going forward. So it's like, right, we got to get to Cal. I think Cal's in danger. Luckily, Ben and them show up like nothing had happened yet because Jace hadn't gotten there yet. So it's like, okay, we're good. They're finally reunited. It's like, all right, we got to get out of here. And in that moment, the federal agent gets popped by Jace. And obviously, bullets are flying everywhere. Pete ultimately tries to go after him as Tariq, Grace, and Cal get away. And for Cal, for Tariq, it's like, Dad still got his rifle here. I'm going to go to try and go get it. For him, it's like, I made this mistake. Like, I'm the reason this all ended up happening. Let me protect you guys. Let me make this right. So he goes to try and deal with that. And ultimately, Jace ends up catching up with him and has a knife to him. And it's like, Tariq kind of points him in the wrong direction, saying like, telling Grace to run. He kind of points towards the woods, but in the wrong direction because, they're actually heading towards, their hideout. And he ends up stabbing Tariq because for Pete tried to talk his brother down, like it's like, I have to be the one to stop him, saying like, you don't have to do this. You think, because for him, it's like, in his mind, killing Cal is the key. It's like, every time that kid dies, someone around him comes back to life. That kid died and we died, we came back to life. That kid died, they did too. It's like, well, there are other extenuating circumstances because you don't know the full scope of everything, because that logic of yours is broken because of Zeke. But maybe the argument, because he wasn't around Zeke when Zeke initially died, so that breaks that logic because he wasn't around everyone when they initially died. So it kind of breaks the logic he has. He's not thinking logically. He doesn't fully understand this. He's just, once again, everyone kind of does this with the callings anyway. They kind of interpret it their own way. So this is his interpretation of it. Like, he feels like if he kills Cal, like it's an insurance policy to ensure like, okay, the kid will die and we'll die, but we'll all come back. It's what he's thinking. Once again, that's not the case. But like, even Pete being like, what if you're wrong? But for Jace, it's like, well, if I'm wrong, I die. Who cares? Like, it won't matter at the end. But once again, it's just like, I guess like the point they're trying to make is that Jace is just so screwed up in the head that like these extenuating circumstances, he says he's not scared of death, but if it's like you weren't so scared of death, you wouldn't be rushing. You'd be listening to what other people are saying. Like, you literally have a chance to change things. To be fair, he did have a chance, and it all changed when he decided to stab Tariq. Tariq ended up dying in Grace's arms, sadly. It's like, that's so effed up, And it's just, it sucks too, because it's like they were making plans for the future. They spent so long apart. They finally got reunited just for her to lose her brother. For her, it's like, you're my baby brother. I'm the one that's supposed to protect you. This was on me. I should have, and he dies in her arms. And Grace is dead set on getting revenge. She gets the rifle. Pete tries to stop Jace. He's like, I'm not going to let you do this. But Jace beats the shit out of Pete and decides that he's still going to do this, And obviously Cal is singing his song, and we had the whole thing of Corey had busted out of his hospital because he had been drawn to Cal. And ultimately, it's like, okay, you need to stop singing that song because it's like, if I can hear it, he can. So he's there to protect. But we still haven't. I don't know if Ben, this might not come up until later on, but let's not forget, Ben saved his brother's life. So maybe this is it kind of coming full circle of like, hey, you know, I don't know if he still hasn't correlated that Ben's the one that saved his brother's life. I don't think. Maybe it never got to that conversation. It's like, oh, just some guy named Ben, you know, maybe he didn't, you know, never found out Ben's last name, so it never correlated. We never got the scenes at the very least showing that Corey ended up connecting those dots. But for him, it's like, I've got to protect this kid. This is what I've decided I'm going to do. So Ben, you know, luckily gets there in time. At the same time, Jared and Michaela meet up with, and Zeke and Michaela meet up with Jared, who's like, you know, it's like, oh, we got to get the cow. You know, they end up showing up, finding the dead federal agent. It's like, all right, we got to do this. We got to track this down. Like, everything's just going like wrong. You know, it's just like everything's kind of ultimately colliding. And when the time comes, you know, Jace is so close, but Grace is already locked and loaded and fires a shot. And he's like, oh, you missed. She's like, no, I don't miss. That was a warning shot. This time, the next one's going between your eyes. But luckily, Ben comes out and he's like, don't do this, Grace. Like, he's going to die anyway. So I don't want you to do this because by doing this, like, I don't want you to live with this guy's blood on your hands, you know? And, you know, Corey shows up and, you know, Pete and Angelina like meet up and everything, and so it's a thing of, you know, she's like, well, you just stay with me, but for Pete it's like, I can't, like, the fact is I'm the one that has to stop my brother, but for her it's like, you've done all that you can, like, he's got to make his choices, just stay with me. So they stay together, but they go confront him, and Jace is pissed because he's looking at Corey, and Pete is like, you guys are traitors, you know, and everyone's gathered around. And, you know, Grace is making sure he stays exactly where he is because it's like, you know, but Ben was like, don't waste, like, don't destroy your, like live with blood on your hands because of him. Yes, he killed Tariq, but he's going to get his just due. He had his chance and he wasted it. So, and they proceed to watch him die in front of them. He's coughing up the water's gushing out his nose and his mouth, and he ends up dying. And then, like, you're like, oh boy. And that's the thing I brought up last episode. I was like, okay, we're about to find out. We're about to get answers. And it's like, Pete's wound on his face heals, and then him and Corey actually feel good. We had just saw Corey throwing up water a little while ago, and Pete seemed like he was shivering, but it's like, oh, everyone's good. It's like, okay. I was like, okay, good. You guys, I was like, oh, I guess it's on a regular, like, a basis of, okay, you two did your job. He's the one that didn't do his, so he dies. You guys are good. You got your entire life. You're like, okay, good. Like, Pete and, you know, Angelina, it's like, yes, he's got to go away to jail to make up, but it's like, after all the good he's done, you know, it's like, oh, you'll get, like, an early release. You'll still have to do some years, but for Angelina, it's like, that's years you have, like, waiting for you, so she's like, I'll wait for you, and they have their kiss, and you're like, oh, young love. It's like, oh, everything's kind of working out. At the same time, Olive, you know, trying to figure everything out, was looking at the, well, the piece had gotten taken, I guess because Levi was like, oh, I'm done restoring it. That's why I just thought we never, like, tied into, like, that. I guess it's just, but it's like, I would assume Levi's name is on, like, because it's like, why was that just, like, about to just be taken away? It's like, it's not even finished, but I guess it's like, as much as it's restored, it's like, we don't know where the missing piece is, but we've restored as much of it, so it's good, it's done, ship it out. But Olive was able to convince the guys by being like, oh yeah, I hope you guys have, like, oh yeah, the fumes and stuff like that, but I hope you guys are okay with, like, you know, fires potentially getting started. So she was able, and then luckily, the Ben's bag found its way to the college. It's like, oh, it's just like, you said Dr. Stone, right? It's like, yeah, oh, here's his bag. And it's like, oh, you know, funny how the world works, you know, and it's like, hey, final piece and everything, Olive's restoring it. It's like, okay, oh, okay. And then the reveal at the end is like, wait, what did you find out? And then she reveals, we were wrong about it. The last trial, it isn't on an individual basis. It's as a trio. all three of them died at the same time, so all three of them are being tried, and you're like, wait, what? And then the shadow of Jace comes back in first. You're like, okay, is this about to turn into some like mega evil or something like that? You're like, what is this about to happen? I was like, is Jason what's his face about to get possessed? Like, what is this going to turn into? I was almost thinking like, are we turning into like a lost shadow monster? Are we going to deal with a literal monster now? And then it manifested itself and grabbed Pete and Corey. You're like, what? No. It's like, no. And they both die. That's what I was saying. I couldn't help it. I was screaming out, holy shit, this is super dark. That's a dark ending. I was like, that is so messed up. Corey and Pete thought they were in the clear. Pete thought he had his entire life over. Like, Angelina and him, like, they connected, they found love, and have him die in front of her like that. That's horrible. Especially because Michaela was like, oh, I'm sorry what happened to your brother. It's like, no, my brother made his choices. You know, at the end of the day, it was like, you know, that's the irony behind it, because he was like, oh, like, you know, if I die, I die. It's like, oh, you dying literally takes everyone else with you. Dude. And what makes it even darker is what the implications are for this. Like, this is just allocated to their circumstances, but this could be reflective of everyone that's been brought back circumstances, because they were being judged as a trio. You know, this is a prophecy about them, but maybe, like I said, you can extrapolate some of the stuff about the fact is that, you know, because that's a sad thing. Ben was like, no, he's going to die. You know, his choices are his and everything. And the whole conversation about, you know, Pete, like, hey, like, you've been good and everything. And it's like, that's the sad effed up thing. They tried to do the right thing at the end of the day, and they still suffer because of the, it's like, and I think that's supposed to show you, like, the dark side of this calling thing, that even when you try to do good, if everything isn't lined up, you know, because for one, they're the ones that misinterpret everything. They're the one that got it wrong. Like, if they had tried to reach out to Jace, if they had tried to save him one last time, like Pete kept trying, if they had tried, instead of being like, you know, so it's like, in an ironic, twisted way, them just letting Jace die is what basically killed everyone else. So that's on them to some extent. And that might be an element we see where it's like, their blood is on our hands because we got this whole thing wrong. We thought it was one way, and now both Corey and Pete ended up losing their life. And like, what's this going to do to Angelina? We have no idea. But what I was suggesting about the dark element to this is, this could apply to the 828ers, that basically this could be suggesting that they're tried as a whole, like this scale of balances and stuff like that could apply to them. And so if one of them fails, they all fail. Everyone has to pass like this judgment scale, and if one person fails, they all die. Zeke's circumstances are special because he died alone, so he was judged purely alone. Those trio died at the same time. They came back at the same time, so they were judged as a trio, as a bunch. So what if that's what that's implying about the 828ers? Because then that opens up a whole other can of worms, because one, Kelly's dead. So now that she's dead again, and obviously what happened is like, oh, her body seems like it's been in the water the entire time, so it kind of went back to its original state. So maybe that takes her out of the running, so they don't have to worry about her anymore. But that still means every passenger from 828, the scales have to be in a positive advantage. And if it's not on a positive level for one out of every single passenger, one passenger can ruin everything. Egan isn't necessarily in the best place because he's done some shady stuff that we're aware of. Obviously, Sanvi's done some terrible things. She inadvertently, directly and indirectly killed the Major, so that's not going to look good on her scale. And so if they're kind of both failing on their fronts, you know, that's, once again, it's like, that's the messed up thing of like, oh, you know, once again, NBC, and I made the comparison last episode. I think I've been using the comparison for a while. It's like, you need your good place points, and like, you have to live a good enough life to like have enough points to get into the good place. And in this particular case, the good place being not dying again, getting to live, having a second, technically your third chance, like Zeke does. But it's like, I think that's what this implies, and if that's the case, it makes this whole situation even darker. So that basically means they have 3 years to tip the scales for every passenger, because if they don't, they all potentially die. But to be fair, you got to hope that maybe Sanvi can find another way. To be fair, Sanvi's other way didn't necessarily help her. That led to a whole slew of issues, but also now she can no longer get the calling, so she can't really help out So does that mean, has she been removed from the equation? Like, is her circumstances kind of her own, much like Zeke's? Or has she been removed from it? Or she forever screwed herself out of it? And by screwing herself out of it forever, can she never fully tip the scales? Because she might still, unlike Kelly, who's dead, Sanvi's still alive. Yeah, she's kind of, her connection has been cut. Maybe there'll be a means of restoring it. Maybe that'll be an element to the story. But at the very least, it's kind of implying that maybe, you know, when it's all said and done, like, she still counts. So if they can't get the scales in her favor when it comes to the scales of judgment, which she can't help out if she can't actually get the callings herself, who knows in the grand scheme of things. Like I said, this is my initial thought. I might even do a video going up next week kind of explaining this, you know, kind of like, you know, I'll probably end up bringing up a lot of these points, but this is currently what I'm thinking about this. And if that's the case, that's, like I said, super dark. This was a messed up ending, you know, and it's just like a heartbreaking ending in actuality. Like, once again, the irony behind it, like, right, them not wanting to save Jace, giving up, just saying like, oh, let him die, ended up, you know. And what makes it worse is like, oh, there was false, it gave you false hope to be like, Corey and Pete got your second chance at life, but it's like, nope, it can't. Essentially, that darkness came and killed both of them. It's like, you know, that's the sad thing. That piece of crap, Jace, ended up dragging them down. Like, it's sadly, he ended up constantly being like, you know, it's like, once again, they got, and that was what I was talking about too. I had brought that up last episode, wondering whether or not 2 out of 3 was good enough, or whether you needed a perfect set. But I was hoping, I was thinking like, well, maybe it would just be, oh, they've done good, so that's enough. Sadly, that's not the case, because they couldn't be judged individually, because they didn't come back individually. They came back as 3. They got judged as a package deal. So once again, this is my thought process about it. Dude, I cannot wait for the next episode. You know, it's like, you know, and that's the sad thing. It's like, they were looking through this prophecy, hoping to give them the answers. And yes, potentially they've gotten answers out of it, but this tragedy ended the way. I mean, it makes you wonder in the original story, like, what we saw, it's like the person that Jace kind of represented still kind of gave into their revenge and ended up being their undoing. So I guess, you know, once again, they didn't have the final piece at the time. And truth be told, it's Egan's fault. Well, that's hard to say, because if Egan hadn't stolen the pieces that he did, like, the domino effects would have never led to this. But it's also like, maybe Egan could have, like, if he had been like, oh, return Ben's bag and stuff like that, but he didn't want Ben to know, like, he had done some shady stuff. So it's like Egan doing things the way he did probably like didn't tip that, probably like negatively tipped the scales, you know. So it's like, that's the effed up thing of like, oh, we're being judged by God or maybe some other being. Once again, Ben's kind of making it seem like God, but who's to say it's not something else entirely. So once again, showing you now the dark side to all of this. Like, till now, it's just like, oh, we're helping people, but it's like, no, this just starting to show you, like, the darkest circumstances of what this could all be potentially. So, a crazy episode. Like I said, again and again, a dark episode. I am so curious to see what lasting effects this is going to have on everyone. What does this mean for everyone going forward? Of like, also, how do you explain this? Because when the bodies are eventually pulled up, it's like, right, they all technically died. Well, Jace died of drowning. How did the other 2 die? Which is also sad too, because Ben saved Corey's brother, and it's like, I mean, to be fair, he had more time with his mom and his brother, but still, it's like, maybe you could look at that as a silver lining, that before Pete died, he found love, Angelina as well. But it's like, oh, you know, you were locked away for so long, you found love for the first time in your life, oh, and just to have it taken away from you, so there's no silver lining in that. It's just, once again, it just completely overshadows everything, and it's like, this is the depressing ass ending. So we'll see what this means in the long run, whether I'm right about my thoughts about it, whether I'm wrong. We'll also have to wait and see. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Jesus. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, low light to the force, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.